Now, let's move back to the main issue as the war in the Middle East reaches the fourth day. Israel has launched a ground invasion of Lebanon as US and Israeli strikes hit targets inside Iran. Donald Trump says the operation is well ahead of schedule and warns the biggest wave is still to come. And he's now taking aim at Britain too, saying that it's sad the US-UK relationship isn't what it was. This is after Keir Starmer hesitated in backing the strikes. We'll speak to Emily Schrader in a moment, journalist and Middle East expert. First, Urban Coningham, research fellow and course lead at the Royal United Services Institute. Urban, good afternoon to you. I mean, we asked the question right at the beginning of this, are we heading for peace or are we heading for World War III? I know there's a lot of ground in between those two statements, but what's your kind of instinctive response to that?
I think my instinctive response would be that we are tending towards peace and that the conflict is unlikely to escalate beyond the immediate region. I think just to come to this point on, does this conflict make the world safer or not? If we lived in a world without the Islamic regime in Iran, there's no question that the world would be a much safer place.
Yeah.
And that's true both for Iranian citizens, for citizens of the region, and ultimately for UK citizens as well. There's obviously escalation and danger from the current conflict and the current clashes, especially if you're a Gulf monarchy or you're living in the Gulf monarchies. But ultimately, I think we do have to bear in mind that the world would be a hell of a lot safer without this regime.
It's very hard to put a time frame on these things. All we do know is that Donald Trump is known as somebody who would not like to be involved in a prolonged war. I mean, I know Venezuela's not an equivalence in this respect, but sort of in and out and get on with it is pretty much his thing. I would imagine as best he can, he'll want to apply that to this. He won't want to be sitting here in a year's time talking about still launching attacks on Tehran. But of course, time is crucial to that question. The longer it goes on, the more things can go wrong. And of course, at the moment, he needs to make sure he keeps the room, doesn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've heard him talk about this sort of 4-week time frame. I think what's different in Iran compared to Iraq and Afghanistan is the US feel that they can accomplish their objectives by using air power alone. So the US feels that it does not need any boots on the ground to accomplish its main objectives. With that in mind, we're unlikely to see a very long, protracted conflict because ultimately there's only so much punishment and pain the Iranian system can endure before having to come back to the negotiation table.
Yeah, I mean, something we've learned over the years is this thing about the end game. And we know that Iraq was, in many respects disastrous purely because of the lack of thought that went into that. And then, of course, as if that lesson hadn't been learned almost, Afghanistan happened and everybody just left. So there are clear markers there in the sand, no pun, to show that there are, there's precedent for getting it wrong. The Americans won't want to do that again, surely.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially at a time where the Republicans are so anti sort of military adventurism and explicitly anti boots on the ground. It's very unlikely to happen. And, it's quite clear that the US priorities are ending Iran's nuclear program and ending Iran's ballistic missile program. They feel they can accomplish both of those from the air. In Iraq, the argument was that we needed boots on the ground in order to go through nuclear enrichment sites and check that they were completely decommissioned. But in Iran, that could be done through international atomic energy monitoring mechanisms, so it doesn't rely on that US sort of component.
What about Allied support? We know that the President Trump's had a bit of a pop at Starmer. That's a couple of times in as many days. But he certainly reiterated his disappointment of this kind of dilly-dallying around on whether Mr. Starmer and this government support what is happening. The wider question of Allied support, he congratulated more or less Europe and saying they've been rather accommodating to things we need. Do you sense that sort of Allied assistance will widen? Will it take on a different form, a military form?
My sense is that the Americans feel that they can do this by themselves with Israeli support. Israeli intelligence on Iran is really, really impressive. And the Americans feel that they have all the military capabilities they need. I think what's most stark in terms of Europeans sort of takes and policy towards Iran and the US is in the US, there's this clear apathy and frustration with the Iranian regime, where they've just decided, look, we cannot do business with these people. They're coming to negotiations, but they're not serious at all. Whereas the UK and the rest of Europe is a lot softer on that. And I think that's why a lot of the language coming from the US regarding European powers is painting the Europeans as sort of weak, ineffectual in this manner.
Indeed. Urban, thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate that. Here's Urban Coningham, Research Fellow, Course Lead at the Royal United Services Institute. Let's get a word with Emily Schrader, journalist and Middle East expert. Emily, good afternoon to you. Nice to have you with us again. I mean, let me just take you back to that point. You know, people keep talking about, well, what about Iraq? What about Afghanistan? One of the issues, of course, with Iraq was that, you know, essentially full-out civil war ended up breaking out after Saddam was removed. A lot of celebration when he was removed. We can remember the statue coming down and all manner of other jubilant scenes in Baghdad High Street as people celebrated this tyrant had gone. But then, of course, the divisions began. In that sense, has Iran got any similar possibilities to this? There does seem to be a feel in the West that Iranians are very happy that the Ayatollah is no more and the regime is breaking down. But once that has gone, what does the scene look like over there in Tehran? Is there a huge divide? Are there different factions waiting to take up the cudgels of government?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on. I think that when it comes to the Iranian public, we're talking about a very different situation than what we saw in Iraq, 2003 and afterwards. Of course, there are differences of opinion. There's different groups with different interests, and I'm sure that they all will be and already are, in some cases, vying for their seat at the table when it comes to a future, hopefully free Iran. But the reality is that we do have a more united opposition than we've ever seen from the Iranian public. We see people across provinces, even different groups within Iran, minority groups within Iran, who have all been calling for the same person to lead a transition government, and that is Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi. And I think from the perspective of the West, it's important that Western leaders show support for this because he actually has a plan to move forward with a smooth transition with order as much as possible in a chaotic situation. He obviously understands the Iranian people and understands what they need, what they're searching for, and already has a concrete 100-day plan for that transition government, which will eventually lead to a national referendum where the Iranian people and them alone will choose the system of governance.
And do you sense that Pahlavi will be in conversations right now with the Americans, with the Israelis? Will they be, you know, essentially cooking up a step-by-step plan?
Well, I know that the Crown Prince's team has already been working on it both independently and with other world leaders through private meetings and consultations to see what they know, what he knows, what information he's receiving from inside of Iran, and what problems need to be met, especially immediate problems. That would be things like currency, the water situation inside Iran, the basics that the Islamic regime has failed for many decades to provide for the people of Iran. So I know that there already is a plan in place. I also know that he has been meeting with various world leaders, not just American, but also European leaders to discuss next steps forward and to build momentum and support. Obviously, he has this from the Iranian diaspora, but what's changed in the past few months is that we see it at scale inside of Iran, and that's very, very key.
And assuming everything goes to plan, if that, I mean, who can tell when there is a war on, but this man comes into power. There's a great celebration and welcoming of a new regime, a very different kind of Iran, one that is not dictated by religion, that has echoes of the great bits of its past, etc. But of course, he will still be inheriting an absolute minefield, economically, if nothing else, of real difficulty and challenge.
Absolutely. I mean, I think there's no shortage of challenges when it comes to effectively rebuilding a new Iran. But I also have researched and looked at some of the plans that they've proposed. I think they have a very good sense of what needs to happen and what needs to happen when. As I stated, they already have a first 100 days after the fall of the regime plan. And again, I've heard a lot of rumors and speculation about the fact, oh, well, he's the son of the prior Shah. It's important to pay attention to what he himself has consistently advocated. Even before this uprising that we saw in the last month, he's never called for a monarchy, has stated explicitly he doesn't wish to come into Iran and be king. He's talking about a transition leadership exclusively to later be chosen through referendum, what the system of governance will be inside of Iran. And I think that takes out a lot of the question marks that we saw with Iraq and Afghanistan, the answers that we didn't have. We're not talking about imposing a regime change from abroad. We're talking about respecting the will of the Iranian people and what they have been calling for at great risk to themselves, with tens of thousands of them being slaughtered in the streets for this.
Sure.
So we owe it to them. It's incumbent upon us from the international community to support them and to echo their voice that currently, right now, as we know already, is being completely silenced. No internet for more than 2 days and counting.
Finally, Emily, back to that question we asked at the beginning. Are we heading for peace or World War III? I'm assuming the former from everything you've said.
Yeah, I believe that if we do indeed see the fall of the Islamic regime, we will be entering a new era of both peace and prosperity for all of the region. That goes for Israel's neighbors, the other Arab states that are being so viciously targeted by the regime right now. Of course, for the relationship between Israel and Iran, a historic relationship that exists there. It's something that will only grow stronger and more powerful and more influential in a positive way that contributes to the international community as potentially even a world power we could see in Iran. I mean, we're talking about a total game changer for the security situation globally. And one more thing I want to add really quickly is that the status quo we're talking about maintaining is very expensive. This is important for the United States, but also for Europe. The amount of effort that goes into foiling terror plots, monitoring these situations, this is not something that comes at zero cost. So when we look at the military operations going on right now, it's not either or. It's not like you're spending a lot more that you wouldn't be anyway. We're talking about dealing with the problem once and for all so that we can build something better in this region and internationally.
Emily, great to have you on. Always very thorough stuff. Lovely to speak again. Emily Schrader, journalist and Middle East expert. It's interesting from our two guests, they're feeling very positive about where the future is on this. Of course, lone characters or subsets and small groups, terrorist cells, do not just disappear overnight. They are like the proverbial air bubble. You pop them away in one place and they, sure as night follows, they pop up somewhere else. So the story ain't a one-way street at the moment. There is lots of caution naturally involved in this, and why wouldn't there be? Curious times we live in. Ultimately, however, are you buying into the idea that this whole Iranian effort and what is happening with Israel and the United States and the particular bombing of Tehran, the removal of that regime, will that eventually form rather quickly a terrain of peace, or are we irredeemably heading towards World War III? 03